pretty much signaling to us that this was Kelsey's team. Now, a lot of people saying Caitlin Clark could be possibly getting ready to break some bad news to a lot of Indiana Fever front office and fans. Could she demand a trade after this year? I don't know. But the way they moving, it looked like that they are preparing themselves for if so. I just got to be honest. Now, Stephanie White did an interview yesterday.
Stephanie White's comments about managing Caitlin Clark's workload heading into training camp have stirred up a notable reaction, particularly among fans who watched Clark perform at a high level throughout the USA basketball stretch just weeks earlier. In a recent interview, White addressed the question of how Clark would be brought along as the new season approaches. Her position was that Clark has been putting in serious work all off-season and carries real advantages heading into camp game timing, competitive rhythm, and pace from her March run with USA basketball. But White also made clear that the coaching staff intends to be deliberate about the types of reps Clark receives in training camp rather than running her through a full load immediately. The framing was about building her up over the course of a long 4-4 game season rather than burning through everything in the early stretch.
Today, now in this interview, we ain't going to play it all because we already reacted to a bunch of it. I want you guys to hear something. Listen to this real quick. And after I play this, let me know how y'all feel.
Riddick, the other day when he said there won't be an update, right, until there's an update.
Right. I mean, I get it, right? It's that catch-22, right? Because people want to ask, but at the same time, there's no. But having said that, what is the time period or the acclimation, if you will, not just for her, but also the teammates around, or although is it advanced?
The problem with that framing for many observers is that it sits awkwardly alongside what Clark actually showed during the USA basketball tournament. She won MVP honors, looked comfortable running the offense at pace, moved the ball effectively, and demonstrated that her body and game were clearly in good shape. She also said publicly at the time that she felt great and was ready to compete. For fans tracking these statements closely, the gap between "she's ready" and "we want to manage her reps" was noticeable. The concern being raised is not really about injury management in the traditional sense.
Is it advantage because you have a lot of new faces, so it's new for everybody?
Yeah, I think it's new for everybody. I think we got to be smart. She has worked her butt off this whole off season to prepare herself. We have an added advantage in that she played games in March, right, with USA basketball. And so she has game exposure. She has game pace. She has game rhythm. She has game timing. And so we have an advantage. But we also want to be smart. She doesn't need every rep in practice. Like we want to continue to ramp her up. It's a long season.
It centers more on whether the Fever's offensive system is being structured in a way that limits Clark's involvement rather than maximizes it. White previously spoke about wanting to run more offense through Kelsey Mitchell and described Mitchell as the player on the roster most capable of creating her own shot without assistance. Read alongside the current comments about Clark's reps. Some are interpreting it as a signal that the offensive hierarchy may not be as Clark-centered as many assumed. The counter-argument is straightforward. Veteran coaches routinely pull back on star players during training camp to protect them across a grueling regular season schedule, and managing workloads is standard practice league-wide. There is also the reality that, with several new faces on the roster, camp is as much about integration as it is about individual development, and spreading reps across the group makes practical sense.
44 games, and we play a heavy cadence of games in a week, and so we want to be smart in camp and make sure we I don't want to say ease her into it because she.
Now, this right here ain't sit right with me because this is insinuating to me that she plans on doing something a little different with Caitlin Clark. Now, Caitlin Clark stated during FIBA World Cup.
But given the level Clark showed during USA basketball and the questions that have already circulated about how the Fever deploy her offensively, the comment landed with more weight than a routine coaching decision normally would. Breaking down the Indiana Fever's complete offseason through the lens of value and roster fit produces a mixed picture, a handful of genuinely strong moves buried under a pattern of redundant guard acquisitions that have undermined what could have been a well-constructed roster. Starting with Shekinna Walker-Kimbrough, operating under the assumption her deal comes in below $400K or near the league minimum, the grade is an F. The Fever did not need another guard under any realistic roster construction. Her presence on the guaranteed roster has almost certainly cost Justine Pisso a spot, which is a significant knock-on consequence.
World Cup basketball, she was 100% ready to go. I think we heard her say that numerous times, bro. Hell, we seen Caitlin Clark ball. Why is we limiting Caitlin Clark for the start of the season? Why? Or going into training camp? Why is you limiting her? Because you're trying to get the ball out of her hand, bro.
There is no version of this signing that addresses an actual team need, and the cascading effect on other personnel decisions makes it one of the worst moves of the entire offseason regardless of price point. Jessica Timmons at pick 40 earns a D, maybe a C-. Bringing in an undersized scoring guard who struggles to initiate offense is not what this team requires even for training camp purposes. Practice bodies should challenge the roster in meaningful ways. Several players taken by other franchises shortly after Lainey White, Lila Fabic, Reagan Beers, Hannah Stalley, among others, would have offered more relevant competition or genuine roster utility.
She's trying to do everything in her power to make sure Caitlin Clark does not reach the level, which we already know she's there. Judging off what we've seen in FIFA World Cup basketball, Caitlin Clark was ready to go, and she stated to the world that she was ready to go. She looked it like she was ready to go. Hell, she won the MVP. She was the best player out there in the entire FIFA World Cup basketball. I don't know. Let's finish listening.
She's ready for camp, but
Timmons is not a bad player in isolation, but the selection made little sense given what was available. Justine Pissot is a more complicated case. On pure basketball merit, this could have been an A+ acquisition. A 6'4" guard with shooting ability is an unusual profile that smart organizations target specifically. The New York Liberty and teams of similar caliber are going to notice her in preseason.
But we want to make sure that we manage, the reps and what kinds of reps she's getting, just to build her up so that she's ready to go, and we don't have any kind of questions about that.
You know, I got to thinking about this, Stephanie. Stephanie White, the head coach of the Fever, my guest. If situations arise again where people start asking the same question repeatedly, and you get to the JJ Redick level, right?
Yeah.
Then I think you bring your phone and you just hit this. As soon as they ask, you just hit this on your phone, right? There you go.
The issue is the developmental contract structure. If another team offers a standard deal after the mandatory 1-4-day window, there is very little stopping her from leaving. And with Walker Kimbrough occupying a guaranteed spot, Pissot's path to the final roster has narrowed considerably. What looked like an A on draft day gets downgraded to a C. There is a real possibility she ends up playing against the Fever before the season concludes. Raven Johnson at the 10th pick settles at a C- after adjustments.
There you go. You just play that, right?
I agree. Can you have that as like a favorites that just comes up, or is it like Siri play you need to calm down?
Well, then it kind of kills the mystique if you're saying the title, right? Because then everybody can figure out what you're talking about.
Yeah, amen. That's
true.
True.
in your coaching off season, you obviously were doing both radio and television for, in basketball, the NBA, and a number of areas. What was the best game you saw in the?
So that was some of Stephanie White interview that she did yesterday. Now,
the pick was not unreasonable in isolation. Her defensive profile is legitimate and there is a role for her in certain lineups. But the Fever used a valuable draft asset on a player who will likely spend the season fighting for end-of-bench minutes alongside Walker Kimbrough. Nalissa Smith would have addressed a genuine positional need. Medina Okot would have added size. Even an undersized wing like Tanya Latson offered a different skill set than what the team already had.
Pissot might be gonzo. Like, Justine Pissot might not be on the roster because of this. And, yeah, I think it's a really tough one to argue that Walker Kimbrough is higher than an F, if we're being completely real. I think overall this is a not great signing and might, when it's all said and done, be one of the worst signings that the Indiana Fever will make. Purely, even though
Johnson projects as a highly specific utility piece, the kind deployed for 4 minutes when an opposing guard is getting loose, then returned to the bench. That usage does not justify a top 10 selection. Sophie Cunningham, returning on a 1-year deal around $650K, is one of the better value signings in the entire free agency period. Her shooting, her connective passing, her defensive discipline, all of it comes at a price that would be a bargain in almost any market environment.
Fever will make. Purely, even though I do not dislike Shatori Walker Kimbrough, just based on everything, based on what the Fever needed and what they really did not need. So we're going to give her an F. And the reason I'm on this screen right now is that, in fact, she is not, you're not going to see Shitori Walker-Kimbrough on the roster for some reason. So next up, we're going to go with Jessica Timmons.
This is somewhere in the range of the 12 to 15 best unrestricted free agent signings by pure value. Had the broader roster situation been different, a longer commitment would have made sense. As a one-year deal, it gets a strong B+ to A-. Kelsey Mitchell's Supermax extension is largely independent of the team's other roster limitations. The contract did not prevent any other signings in any meaningful way.
Next up, we're going to go with Jessica Timmons at number 40. I'm going to say for Jessica Timmons, I'm going to give this a D, a C- maybe. Why? Because the Indiana Fever did not need an undersized scorer. Like, even for training camp. Even at training camp. These are the last type of players that you need in your... Like, if you want to sign practice players to just be dogs, you don't need a scoring undersized two-guard that can't really facilitate.
Having Mitchell healthy and back in the lineup raises the floor considerably. She will likely contend for all-star recognition and potentially an all-WNBA spot. The ideal outcome would have been leveraging her value in a sign-and-trade to accumulate assets, but retaining her on the court gives...
It's not what you want. You don't want to work in practice against a bunch of, like, elite scorers. I don't think Jessica Timmons is a bad player, but when you could have taken Lanny White, who had a legitimate chance to do something for your team as a pure spot-up shooter, you could have taken Layla Filia, you could have taken Yarden Garzone, you could have taken Reagan Beers, you could have taken Maggie Dugan, Hannah Stolke. Shea Chesky is just better than Jessica Timmons, and they do similar things. There are so many of these players that are getting picked up straight away. But
Lexi Hull's 2-year deal at $1.5 million total is the one contract that genuinely qualifies as an overpay. Hull contributes in specific ways. She shoots well in stretches, draws charges, defends with effort, but she is a bench piece, being compensated at a level closer to a rotation starter. The forward market across the league inflated prices this offseason, but this deal still stands out as a stretch, C-.
Up straight away by other teams that you could have taken instead of Jessica Timmons at 40. I don't hate the Jessica Timmons pick. I'll give it a D because it just wasn't what they needed. There was so much more that they could have gotten. Then the pick right before that, they signed Justine Passat. Justine Passat is I'm not low on Justine Passat. The reason why I'm not high on Justine Passat is that she's not going to make the roster.
Monique Billings at 2 years, $1.6 million total is a reasonable signing given the going rate for power forwards. She fits the system, brings professional stability, and at $800K per year is roughly market value. If the deal had come in around $600K, this would be an easy A. At actual price, a B+ feels right.
Not going to make the roster. The Shitori Walker-Kimbrough pick has basically meant that Justine Passat is not going to make the roster for the Indiana Fever. And I'm sorry, based on what my understanding of the developmental slot rule, if she signs her developmental deal, she can't leave for 14 days. There is going to be a team in the WNBA that is going to want to sign if she shows anything in preseason. Like, all she has to do is walk on the floor in preseason and hit a three-pointer. And somebody is going to sign her at the...
Damiris Dantas on a veteran minimum is more defensible than her 2024 performance would suggest. She was among the less effective players to receive meaningful minutes on a playoff team last year, but landing a non-reserved free agent with rotational experience at minimum cost, when the alternative was someone like Kaya Stokes at a higher price, has to be acknowledged. B. Purely on contract value relative to position market, Ty Harris at $400K on a one-year deal is the best signing the Fever made this offseason, and it is not particularly close.
And somebody is going to sign her at the end of those 14 days. The New York Liberty very well could be looked like they're a smart team. They're going to see a 6'4" guard shooter and see what they saw with Leo Phoebish. And teams really underrated Leo Phoebish. The reason why is because she's not an out-and-out post player, but she was a 6'4" guard. Teams are going to see that in Justine Passat. And someone is going... Like, this could be an A. This could have been an A+ pick, but
She is the strongest backup guard in the league. She can run the offense as a primary ball handler, operate alongside a high-usage star the way she did alongside Alyssa Thomas, shoots efficiently in catch-and-shoot situations, and brings genuine defensive effort. The fit alongside both Kelsey Mitchell and Caitlin Clark is seamless. A+. And the primary reason the guard depth criticism has to be qualified, Harris alone justifies the approach, even if the execution around her was misguided.
This could be an A. This could have been an A+ pick, but I fully believe by the end of the season we will see Justine Passat playing against the Indiana Fever. So I'm not going more than a C+, because this is a pick that they should have just drafted a stash. If she doesn't make the final roster, I'm very confident we will see her playing against the Indiana Fever. This could be wrong, but I gave this an A on draft day. But after the Shatori Walker-Kembro signing and her basically being guaranteed a role in the team, I'm going to put this in C. Instead of an A sign.
The 2 training camp guard contracts are both F grades. One was signed largely on geographic familiarity. The other offers little that the roster did not already have. Waiting until post-draft to survey the market for more position-specific additions would have been the smarter path. Maisha Hines-Allen, assumed to be near the minimum, is a high-variance signing that earns a B+ in context.